Hello everyone, I am back with another video. Today we're recording something that is a little unexpected. I actually was not anticipating releasing a video this week at all, but given some news that recently dropped earlier today, I really felt obligated to kind of get behind the camera. And that is the fact that Game Informer has kind of suddenly closed their doors after 33 years. And I think the writing has probably been on the wall that Game Informer's time was limited and they were nearing the end. And I think we're also very thankful that we got 33 good years that we did. But it's still a punch in the gut that it's official and they are no more. And I have a tremendous fondness for this magazine and the first issue I ever got, getting that magazine on a monthly basis, anticipating that next release and the cover story reveals, and everything in between. So there's so much to get into that I want to share. This is not going to be a doom and gloom video and all the circumstances surrounding GameStop and the closure and all of that kind of stuff. I definitely want this to be more of a celebration of Game Informer, the treasured memories I have with the magazine, and hopefully all of your memories as well. So please leave me a comment down below. Let me know what are your fondest memories with the magazine. Maybe a particular review, cover story you read. Maybe you discovered a game you had never heard of before by thumbing through that magazine and reading about something, and it was added to your most anticipated games list at that particular time. Those are the types of things I want to get into in this video. It's going to be pretty free form, but I do want to make sure I have plenty of B-roll footage of lots of Game Informer magazines. I have a bunch of stuff here, including my very first Game Informer issue, the Warriors cover story. So lots of stuff to get into in this video, but please leave me a comment below. Let me know what some of your favorite memories are with Game Informer. Well, it probably makes the most sense for me to start when I got my first Game Informer issue, and that is when I walked into GameStop. I was probably about, 10 to 12 years old with my mom, and I was just planning to pick up a couple used PlayStation 2 games. And I went in, and there was an incredibly nice GameStop clerk that was there at the time, kind of helping me find what I wanted. And when he was ringing me up, he had asked if I wanted to sign up for a power-up rewards card or whatever the program was called at that time. And I signed up because it was like, 10 to 15 bucks, and he told me I'd get the subscription to Game Informer. And he gave me two giant issues of the magazine, the first of which was the Warriors cover story issue, which I obviously still have my copy. The other was From Russia with Love with Sean Connery's likeness, that game back in the day. He gave me both of those magazines as part of initially kind of signing up. But what was so fascinating about the magazine at the time is that this is 150 pages thick. Like, this is a very thick magazine. And what's interesting is if you do a side-by-side comparison of a more recent issue, you can see just how much bigger the pages were and how much more material was actually printed at that time versus later on when they were probably cutting as much cost as they could to retain the magazine's existence. This is less than 100 pages in this book versus that one that was 150. And so anytime you brought one of these magazines home from the GameStop stores or one arrived on your doorstep month to month, I mean, you were just feasting on all kinds of video game news, previews, reviews. I mean, the earlier Game Informer magazines just had dozens of reviews month to month. I mean, dozens. I can't emphasize how big the review sections were back then, compared to more recent issues where it's kind of just five reviews, 5 to 8. And so month to month back then, the Game Informer magazines, it felt like you were really getting your money's worth, certainly with a subscription service, but also getting to see so much video game related news and content. And I think that's one of the things that I want to highlight most. It's been so disappointing to see the game industry change over time is back then, I legitimately looked forward to that magazine arriving month to month because I knew I was going to discover, read about games I'd never heard of. I knew that their cover stories were going to be coverage that you wouldn't get anywhere else. And I feel like so much of our gaming news today is either discovered as part of some random YouTube thumbnail, or today being a perfect example, it was just a quick blurb on Twitter that said Game Informer is closing, or you see game studios closing, layoffs, game delays, or potential leaks for games. announcements that a game is arriving on a particular date, we see so much of that now just instantaneous. It's just a tweet, it's a headline, it's just immediate. And back then, I felt like you really needed to kind of wait, and there was such a much greater sense of anticipation when it came to games, as opposed to now where it's so immediate, right? You just look up something on your phone, it's right there, and we're never going to go back to that, you know? And so while it's disappointing that we're never going to get back to that day and age where it felt like the sense of discovery was so much greater than it is today, I still feel like these magazines hold or almost a kind of time capsule for that day and age when you did have to wait and you did get these very point in time limited coverage from a particular outlet where you read about things like Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild. Game Informer had the first cover story, or BioShock. They were the ones that had a cover story for that, and just being able to kind of thumb through those cover stories and see initial concept images of the game and really get into the game developer's shoes to kind of pull back the curtain and see the inspiration for the games that they were creating, detailed stories and discussions with these creators. It was really pretty amazing and just a special time back then. And I guess over the past 33 years to be able to be fortunate enough to have gotten all of these different magazines. I don't even know the number that Game Informer capped it at, but it was well over 300 issues of the magazine. And that is definitely something that team can be proud of. But speaking of the Game Informer team, it naturally has evolved and changed dramatically over the course of its 33-year run. Several different editors-in-chief, lots of different staff writers over the years, but there are a few folks in particular that are very big standouts for me because they helped me discover or get into certain series of games that I otherwise wouldn't, or just further solidified my passion for RPGs, for example, that I want to make sure I call out in this video. And I could be here forever talking about these people, but there's a few people that I do, again, want to call out. And one being Daniel Tack, who was a more later staff writer for Game Informer, and he was kind of the key guy that wrote about the Dark Souls, Bloodborne, just the Soulsborne type games in general. And I remember, I think it was the midnight release for, it might have been Bloodborne or Dark Souls 2, I can't remember, but as soon as his review went out, him, Tim Turry, Andrew Reiner, like hopped behind the mics and they started a new file and were playing through the game as Daniel kind of described or explained his rationale for his review score.
Hey, dude.
There's Dan Tack.
It's
has
Dan
entered.
Tack, everybody.
That's Wade Wojcik.
Yes.
He's our video producer.
Behind the scenes.
Tack, you've made it just in time for your blood transfusion.
That's right.
This seems risky. Are you sure you want to go with this procedure, or?
Let's give it a try, see what happens. Sounds safe.
And that leads to a whole series of videos that they did, like Replay and Super Replay, where they would go back to earlier games, whether it was retro or just several console generations back, or play a recent game that one of the editors normally wouldn't play. And Dark Souls is a great example. I remember Tim Turry playing through the original Dark Souls and Daniel Tack kind of being there to encourage him and help him kind of get through the game, coach him, if you will. One of my fondest memories ever watching or tuning into Game Informer related content. It was so special.
Well,
that's okay. We're making this harder. I like it.
Yeah. He kind of has a Kraid look to him, doesn't he?
You know, he kind of does, Hanson.
that's actually a good point.
The butt specifically.
Oh, and like that seemingly ball sack thing right there.
This is Dark Souls right here, poking giant enemies in the butt.
This is the real meat of the
to
series.
epic music, yeah. I mean, a lot of fights can be boiled down to that, but not all.
Boiled butt.
Yeah.
Boil that butt, Tim.
You're doing
I'm trying to boil the butt, okay,
You are.
guys?
You're doing an excellent job.
Good night, you dummy.
Welcome to Dark Souls. I'll be your tutorial.
Perfect. Thank you.
Not to mention the annual charity streams that they would do for 24 hours. And that was really, I think, the entire team coming together, but one person in particular I think really helped to drive that charity event, and that was Ben Hansen, who has been incredibly instrumental for me when it comes to the podcast that I created and continuing to make stuff for my YouTube channel. What he did for the GameInformer Show is something I know I'll never forget, and it was also a show that I very much anticipated every single week when they recorded it, so much so that I would write in questions for their weekly show when I was in college at the time, over and over and over again, hoping that they'd eventually read my question on the show. And week to week, they would give an award or reward for the question of the week. And eventually, I was the person that asked a question, and I was the one that they kind of gave the award to for question of the week. And as a result of doing that, they sent me a Game Informer magazine at the time. So Quantum Break was the cover story with all of the staff members' signatures at the time. So Andy McNamara was still there. Reiner was still there. Dan Reichert may have even still been there as well, but the majority of the folks that I really enjoyed tuning into and reading their coverage of games, I got all of their signatures on this magazine, and something that I still need to get framed. I can't believe I haven't already, but Game Informer printer paper, Tim Turry wrote me a note that said, "Hey Rusty, you rock for tuning into the GI show and taking the time to email us. Keep being awesome." How freaking cool is that? Something that I will always cherish, and just major shout out to Ben specifically for being such an inspiration for me, and just major kudos to him for what he's done with the MinMax show and kind of going independent and creating his own thing. But one other person I want to shout out is Kimberly Wallace. She was also kind of a later person in the GI show or Game Informer run as it relates to the magazine, and just a huge fan of RPGs, big fan of Kingdom Hearts, the Xenoblade series, and always loved reading her coverage of games and RPGs, especially over the years. But so many others that I could shout out. I mean, Matthew Cotto, Joe Juba, who I remember reading his Final Fantasy 13 and 13-2 reviews. I mean, just so much nostalgia for that magazine and the people that have contributed to it over the years. But it's very easy, I think, for people to just consume YouTube or listen to podcasts or read video game magazines, but someone is responsible for taking the time to record that video or produce that podcast or have gotten inspired to want to get into journalism and writing a cover story or writing a review for a magazine. And so I just think it's important to really highlight some of those people that have put so much time and energy into this thing that has been going on for 33 years. And it's, again, something that I have a tremendous fondness for. I always will. I have a giant pile of GI magazines sitting around. I unfortunately got rid of a significant portion of my collection when we bought our house a few years. Magazines are pretty heavy, especially early Game Informer magazines. But the last thing I want to do is just highlight some of my favorite sections of the magazine, kind of dating back again to some of those earlier issues. Many of the sections that I loved were cut over the years because they really just got to kind of the core content of the magazine that was probably getting the most viewership with the physical magazines, then of course clicks on the website. But just a few favorite sections of mine. One is in the very beginning of the magazine, after Andy McNamara, whoever the editor-in-chief was, would kind of give their opening blurb. There was a section where all of the editors had their own headshot and kind of a list of the games that they were playing and enjoying at the time, their likes and dislikes. So there were some magazines, given the era that it was in, and this was still a featured section of the magazine, they were talking about rewatching their Lost DVDs, like the TV show Lost, or the Minnesota Vikings, because Minneapolis is where GI was headquartered. And it was just, again, a point in time. It was so interesting to see the kind of the people behind putting this magazine together, what they were doing on any given month. I just thought that was really interesting. A lot of other random ones are just also in the beginning, they would have a featured section for fans of the magazine to write in. And there was one particular section where people would send in images or pieces of art that they had put together that would be featured in the magazine. So those were always so interesting to see. And then with any magazines at this time, particularly video game magazines, just seeing random ads, whether it was for the PSP, the Nintendo DS, or just like weird advertisements where you could buy wallpaper for your old school flip phones. Like, talk about of the era, things that we will never see advertised again, but so interesting and fun nonetheless. Those are the types of things that I love, pulling the GI magazines that I have off the shelf and going through and just reminiscing about simpler times, but also very different times when people were still walking around with flip phones. I also appreciated with each review that they did, not only did they have a score from 1 to 10 and a detailed description as to how they kind of came to that conclusion, but on the side of each review, they also highlighted certain things like replayability, the music, or the voice acting in the game, and kind of gave you a small blurb highlighting those particular pieces as well. So if you did just want to kind of get a quick hit, like what is this person's overall thoughts, you could read the score, but then also those kind of key categories, you can also get a better sense, just higher level, what their thoughts were on the game. Another favorite section of mine was at the very end of the magazine. It was a two-parter. One of them was charts, where they basically just featured the top 20 best-selling games of the month. So it was always interesting to see like what was pulling ahead, what was dropping below, and just at any given time, like what was generally really popular. That was always so interesting. But then also the review archive, where it was organized by console, and you could just see dozens, if not hundreds of games across all of the current generations of consoles at that particular time for that issue, what they reviewed, what certain games reviewed at, and the month that it was featured in a particular Game Informer magazine. That was always kind of a quick hit way for me to kind of just get an idea of, if I do go into GameStop in the next week or so, what types of games should I keep an eye out on or eye out for based on the review scores. So many different sections I could go into. Maybe in a future video, if there's any interest, I can kind of thumb through favorite GI magazines of mine and really kind of double click into certain features, review stories, reviews, cover stories, all of that good stuff. There's so much amazing content over the years that Game Informer has produced, both in print, but also as part of their Game Informer show, that I just cannot speak highly enough about. It's meant so much to me, has really, and I mean this so truly, has left a profound impact on my love of games, certain series that I've fallen in love with that I probably wouldn't have if it wasn't for GI, but also, perhaps more than anything, people like Ben Hansen and Tim Turry getting me deeper into podcasting and creating stuff on YouTube. So just a tremendous thanks to all of them. I don't know if they'll ever see this video, but hopefully this video has connected with some of you out there, and it's maybe reminded you of just simpler times in the game industry when we got print magazines to tell us about the games that were around the corner. What exciting times it was, and a time that I'm going to miss quite a bit. We have definitely kind of closed a chapter in the gaming industry. Nintendo Power is no more. And now after 33 years, Game Informer is no more. But certainly never forgotten, and a magazine I will continue to read and probably go to eBay and buy additional issues that have some pretty cool cover stories. But I want to once again thank you all for watching this video, but more than that, please leave me a comment below. Let's continue the discussion of how special Game Informer was, the treasured memories you have reading this magazine, and maybe some of your favorite writers over the years as well. But Game Informer, thank you so much for all you've done for me. I will definitely continue to read these magazines and hold on to them with very fond memories. But thank you all again so much for watching, and I will see you in my next video.